Thank you, everybody. Great to be introduced by the voice of Goddess, Nikki. Thank you, Nikki, for everything that you have done and your team to pull together an incredible summit. And I hope that all of you who are here today for this panel have had a really mind-opening experience. We're certainly loving hearing the voices of all the participants and seeing the connections that start to get made when you bring together people from all parts of the world, all disciplines, all age groups, the kind of collaboration that happens when minds come together and collide, create something new that neither could have made alone. We love that. This is, of course, an issue of this time and of all time. And we're going to need this kind of spirit of collaboration, pointing towards inclusion and solutions, forever. And it's young people who are carrying so much of the leadership and so much of the awareness. People like me who are older benefit so much. But we also really want to give. We want to be involved in your trajectory as mentors, friends, and supporters. I really think it's when the younger and the older work together and partner in a spirit of mutual learning, reciprocity. That's when you really get the breakthroughs. And when I was your age, I had some amazing mentors in my life. And sometimes those mentors urged me on and gave me that feeling that they believed in me because they had faith in me. I had more faith in myself. But sometimes they also gave me a little bit of tough love, hey, you can still learn. And I think one thing that helped me in my career working in education in various institutions and a lot of different change movements was that I liked getting good lessons. Because if you don't know, someone's got to tell you. If they don't tell you, it's actually not respectful. The respectful relationship is the one when we're exchanging. Well, that's what you're all about. That's what this is all about with young leaders. And so we're super excited about where this is and also where it can go coming out of the summit as we look to future summits and even more importantly, the future work that we all have to do together. So in that spirit, we're going to have a discussion today with panelists about some of the most important lessons they have learned in climate advocacy. And they may be able to offer you some encouragement, some suggestions, and definitely take some questions. And I really think that some of those, that practical insight is so valuable for all of us to share with one another. It's definitely a two-way passage, I think, between those who have experienced a lot of it and maybe need to unlearn some things that we do, and those that are coming up and know so much and also can have things rounded out that just comes from the benefit of people who have been doing things for a while. So, have a great discussion. Here's who's going to come up on stage. I wish we had walk-up music or something, but we don't. But that's a takeaway for next year. So I don't know what our panelists would want, of course, but we have Jacob Ali Wertheimer, climate activist. We have Faith Edom, who's the economic advisor for Environment and Climate Change Canada. We have Vanessa Garcia Polanco, who's the federal policy director for the National Young Farmers Coalition. We have Sailatam Saha, who's a special advisor in the Office of the U.S. Special Presidential Envoy for Climate, which is John Kerry, I think. And we have Louis Aguirre, who is the anchor for WPLG News and our moderator today. And thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Dan, and thank you all for being here. Besides being a news anchor here at WPLG, the local ABC affiliate here, I do a little segment once a week called Don't Trash Our Treasure, where we focus on the environmental challenges that we face here living in South Florida, everything from resiliency to water quality issues, and of course the scourge of global pollution, which we see manifest itself way too much in our shorelines or beaches, our waterways. And I shine the spotlight on the young people who are out there every day, every weekend, on their free time, fighting for change, fighting for their future, fighting for a shared, most magical backyard. So it is so fitting that I'm here with the young leaders in the climate action movement because it is you who inspire me, you who inform my work. It has often been said that throughout American history, I would argue world history, that whenever a real phase change happens in our world, it is always the young people making that change happen. We're going to have a very lively discussion. We have a very incredible panel here with you. We will take your questions at the end of our discussion. I promise I'll make some time for that. But with that being said, Let's get into it. You guys ready? Many of you were here from the very beginning. On Tuesday morning, I think, there was a young lady from right here in South Florida. Her name was Gianna Hutton, a 17-year-old senior at Miami Palmetto Senior High. Gianna, are you here with us right now? I wish you were. She gave an amazing, inspiring talk about signing up for an AP environmental science class that was offered in her school. Very blessed to have that in her school. And it was that ignited her activism. She not only learned about the climate crisis, but decided to do something about it, initiating a Meatless Monday program that her school adopted and then shared with other schools here in the South Florida community. They talked about the importance of composting and climate literacy as a goal for the entire school district. That was her moment. That was a seminal moment in her young life as an activist. I'm wondering what it was for each of you that spurred you into action and what motivates you to go forward. Jacob, I'll start with you.
Sure. Thank you very much for that information and doing us today. I think for me, inspiration comes from a couple of places. I think one, you made a great point when it comes to how change often needs to come from young people. And as somebody who's growing into an adult in this world, it's become very clear to me that we're entering a time in which it's upon us to make the change that we want to see. It's upon us to take the torch and be the leaders of the next generation and to create a world for people that we will care about someday. Because while we will see a lot of imminent impacts if we don't address climate issues now, a lot of the greatest issues that we will face will come into play later in life. And as somebody who intends to bring children into this world and will care about the young people who come after me, I think my biggest inspiration is the fact that I care about others. I don't think anybody's in this necessarily for themselves. If your motivation is purely individual, it's pretty hard to get up and fight for something that impacts everybody. It's about caring about other people, and caring about a cause that's much larger than yourself that motivates all of us.
Well said. I believe that it's about all of us and finding that connectivity, not just each other, but to nature, right? Because we're all connected, we're all one. Vanessa, how about you?
For me, it was definitely the process of migration. I was born and raised in the Dominican Republic, and at 15 years old, I migrated to North Providence, Rhode Island, a small town outside Providence. And we moved because I wanted to pursue an environmental career. And at the time, there were no environmental bachelors of science in the Dominican Republic. Only if you wanted to become an environmental teacher, which I did not. I wanted to do something more policy or related to markets and businesses. So we moved to the United States for me to pursue my Bachelor of Science when I arrived in high school. And when I arrived, Rhode Island is a really amazing state. I was doing a lot of climate action and climate change, but my town was not there. My town was, they didn't want to recycle, they didn't want to do anything related to a lot of the investments that we're starting to speak about nationally. This is the first time Obama when we have a lot of investment on green economy, green investments, a lot of infrastructure focus on climate action for the first time. And my town was just not having it. And I, as a English second language speaker, ESL classroom kid, immigrant in a new, predominantly white town, I want to do something about it. I want to change how people that look like me engage in the climate movement in a really different way. And I started doing it by talking to businesses, doing a green business expo, and that led me to organize around farmers and local food systems because I came from a really strong agricultural background in the Dominican Republic, and that led me to work in the office in the mayor to advance green initiatives and green projects like farmers markets, green businesses incentives, and other opportunities to get more businesses excited about the green economy developments that we were having at that time in the United States.
And I expect you're going to export this back home, also what you're learning, what you're putting into place at the DR.
Definitely. I think a lot of us who are dual national, that are part of the diaspora, we have a huge responsibility to be funneling what we're learning in the United States back to the Dominican Republic. And I'm part of this amazing cohort of Dominican immigrants and Dominican diaspora people who are the main job is just to get money from the U.S. and funnel it back to the Dominican Republic for green projects and investments. And it has been a really exciting experience to actually just be, this is my role that I can play as a member of the diaspora to funnel resources. I don't have to decide or shape how the resources go to. I just need to get money for just like great projects happening down there.
I can sense that fire in your belly, Ron. You are impressive. Faith, how about for you?
Yeah, so for me, similar to Vanessa, I'm an immigrant, I'm a Nigerian Canadian. And for me, that's where a lot of my motivation comes from, environmental justice, specifically related to Africa. Nigeria is unfortunately, or depending on your view, the largest oil producer, specifically crude oil, on the African continent. And where I'm from, the Niger Delta region, is where most of these projects are occurring. And that has resulted in over 4,000 oil spills, over 9 to 13 million barrels of oil spills inshore and offshore. It has negatively impacted pre- and postnatal development, our ecosystems, our biodiversity. It's to the point where local farmers and local fishermen have to go to neighboring countries in Cameroon and Niger to have a livelihood. So for me, that's my motivation, because my parents want to go back home. They want to retire where they came from. That's my homeland. So for me to see such levels of pollution and degradation, I can't not be anything but motivated to try to impact some change. And through my work and throughout the years, I hope that I'm able to see some accountability of not only organizations, but nations, and they're part of the process of supporting various countries in Africa towards a just transition and working on energy policy beforehand. I currently work on international atomic finance. It really gave me the basis of understanding what energy policy we can push forward in those regions, what's feasible, what's not. Because some projects are more feasible here in North America, but they're just not going to work in Africa. We just don't have the infrastructure, or we just haven't even thought about building that infrastructure because we're so focused on other countries exploiting our resources. So for me, I hope throughout the years and throughout my life, I'm able to see that accountability, and that really is what motivates me.
So the common thread here is really it's home that really ignites the fire, wanting to make our homeland better, and something that we witnessed as a kid growing up, the love that we feel for our family, our neighbors, our homeland. That is what's driving us, wanting to preserve and protect that. How about for you, Tom?
Of course, and thanks for having me. Additional caveat, so I'm here in my personal capacity, and I'll represent any U.S. government agency. So let's have some fun. For me, I kind of came into climate in more of a policy sense, and then I kind of transferred over to the personal connection. So I'll say I didn't come into this when I was in high school or college. I was an IR, international relations person by trade, so I'd think about these squishy, large issues of global politics, great power competition, international institutions, which I think we all know in this room are actually quite relevant to the climate conversation, but 2015, 2014, when I was thinking about these things, I had no idea. But I was specializing in energy security, obviously also a through line, but I was thinking of, the best way I would describe this is actually what's happening now with the Russian invasion of Ukraine, where the energy ties, the energy dependence, separate from the climate issue, is really informing kind of how countries can make their decisions. That's the stuff I was interested in. And then I just kind of made a natural connection from there. That issue, unfortunately, in Ukraine, that's happening now, has been there for 10 to 15 years. So I was thinking about it then. And the same solution set there, getting off of fossil fuels and transition to clean energy, serves both purposes. It's two birds, one stone. And that was my entry point into climate. My first job out of undergrad coincided actually with the Paris Agreement aside, so that was part of it. But was in an energy and climate program at a think tank at the Council on Foreign Relations. And there are a lot of good things about think tanks, but you get to think a lot and just sit and write. And most importantly, this will probably be a theme for me, you meet a lot of really great colleagues who do such different areas of policy than you. I was a climate and energy guy, which, I mean, I'm sure there were like a bunch of people in this room, and we all work in different pockets of that space, but it was me, my boss, and whatever intern we had at the time covering the whole gamut of it. So I got my hands on a lot of things that I probably should have gotten to. But all what that meant is I was writing pieces with the person doing China and Russia and the Middle East and international economics and human health. That really drove home for me that how can you not focus on this? How is this not the most important thing in the room for the consideration, the policies that everyone else is working on? Which makes me a really fun person at parties when we talk about policy in DC. But I just couldn't see a way around it, so that was it for me. And the personal connection, eventually you kind of come back home to these things. My parents are immigrants. I'm the only person in my family born in the States, but they're from Bangladesh, which is probably one of the most climate vulnerable nations. So I think the policy sustained me for a couple of years, but the personal connection is well beyond this. the long haul.
I think it was Pelosi who said on Monday night that it was by cultivating human sentiment that you can really move the needle on this. So what are we doing to fire the people of the world up, to wake them up to the urgency that this moment of time dictates? Because we all know that the window is getting smaller and smaller as the seconds tick away. So what are we doing to fire the world up? What is the youth doing? Besides that formidable 2019 climate march, we talked a lot about the sustainability of that, right? How do you maintain the momentum of that? The eyes of the world saw 1 million youth, skip school that day and march on the streets of their homeland. Up to 6 million people worldwide took part in that march. But how do we sustain that energy? How do we sustain that movement? Who wants to take that?
I can talk a little bit about that.
Okay.
So my organization is National Young Farmers Coalition. We are a nationwide coalition based in the United States. We have 53 chapters and members nationwide, and we represent 250,000 farmers and eaters and food systems advocates. I will say a lot of what we do is really important that we tell our stories and it's a matter to elected officials and we hold them accountable. I would love to say that 90% of my job is to send thank you emails like thank you for speaking up on climate or thank you for introducing a bill on climate, and it's not. It's 90% emails like why do you vote on this? Why do you remove that budget line? Why do you didn't do this? And many of the times what we have to do is like many of these issues are our generation elected officials, especially in Congress, don't see it as a priority. Not many of them do. So we have to be putting people forward, people that look like me, people that look like the people in this room, who are advocates for climate and being impacted by climate, like farmers, like the people that I represent, and actually telling their stories of why they care about climate, so we can change the narratives and actually make change. And if we then hold them accountable if they don't go the way we want them to, or other mechanisms. Well, it's really important, I feel, for our generation to find the clear change in the mechanisms that we want to use to enact change. And you can move through life and find different mechanisms. Like I started at a local level working with the office of my mayor, then I worked through my state level because my mayor he can only go so far and doing so many things climate related. And then I moved to the federal level, and now on this beautiful nexus when I get to advise farmers and advocates all across the multidimensional possibility of policy, even at the international level, working with COP, working with and other related things related to food and agriculture. So my advice for anyone that is trying to find their space on climate action is find your path and be really specific, but also don't forget it's multidimensional. And the best advice that I received really young in my career, don't be a mile wide and an inch deep. And for policy, sometimes we have to be a mile wide and inch deep. We need to know a little bit of everything, how everything connects to everything. I need to know that Ukraine being invaded is going to affect oil markets and fertilizers for me. But you also have to know, you have to be really good at one part of the climate movement, be really good at it, and be really specific and think. What are the policy proposals? What are the changes that we need? Because right now, especially in DC, people want to do things, but they're coming to us for ideas. So if you don't have them, you cannot keep the conversation going.
Are the young people, though, active enough in the electorate? We heard it said, I think it was John Doerr that brought it up, that in order for real change to happen by 2025, the top 20 emitting countries have to make climate change a top 2 election concern. And we're nowhere near that in this country. I think 46% of the electorate in the 2020 election said that they were somewhat influenced by the climate crisis. That's not good. So how do you fire the young people up to turn out and vote? Isn't that a problem?
I may jump in here. I think there's a couple factors to this that are really important to address. One of which is something that we see a lot, and what is one of my real main focuses of work, which is mass incarceration, the death penalty, and issues like that. When we see, a black man or woman will be shot and killed, we'll all come out in the streets and protest, and a lot of people will go home and act like nothing happened right after that. We don't have a lot of organization when it comes to the protest that you brought up. Millions of people down the streets, and that's wonderful to protest about climate change. But why is that not happening continuously, right? Why don't we have that every year? Why is that not twice a year, right? Where's the level of organization? I think it's really important to speak of this at a conference like this. We have a lot of people here really concerned, really well connected, and really involved in this fight, where we can talk right now. about how do we organize the next march, and continuous marches, things that are constantly going on to keep this on people's minds and to get them to constantly understand that this is the most important issue. Because I bet when that march was going on, a lot of people would have said, oh yeah, that is my number one or number two issue. But 2 months later, it fell to the back of their minds. I think another thing that's really important in terms of elevating this to a more important issue for more people in this country is also how we frame it. Climate change has an inherently difficult uphill battle in that a lot of people don't necessarily see what's going on every day in their day-to-day lives, or if they do, they just tend to not always be aware of it. When there's a lot of ways that we can impact our society to make change and help our environment that will impact people so clearly in their day-to-day lives, especially with issues like urban design and how we plan our cities and how that will change everything. We become a less car-dependent society in our cities. When you look at the economic impacts of that, when you look at the impacts in creating more affordable housing, all of these are issues that will directly impact and benefit climate change, but also benefit the people who need to get out and vote and are part of the communities that are impacted most as well. It's people who are most impacted by climate change who will also suffer the worst from a housing crisis. And yet we spend most of our time building bigger parking lots for megastores rather than building affordable housing, because we're such a car-dependent society rather than public transportation. I mean, so many people have gotten so interested in electric vehicles, and that's wonderful, and it's a nice alternative. But where's the talk about how vehicles in and of itself have been such a terrible point of this country? The rest of the world is heavily catching on. I think I saw that the mayor of France recently ran and won her election on getting rid of half of the city's parking spaces. America isn't taking much similar action. And these types of impacts, I think, will motivate more people because they see these benefits to their daily life. These are things that impact you every single day. I think it's really important that we bring that forward to the forefront.
But these marginalized communities, these marginalized people, are people that are being left out of the climate conversation. They are the ones that can have the most impact if you engage them, if you take care of them. And it's extremely important. Vanessa, I'm sure you see this in your work too. What do you do?
Yeah, definitely. What I would like to add, a lot of the things that we see, well, maybe no better in turnout, is that we see a lot of enfranchisement, especially in BIPOC communities. Our elected officials sometimes don't look like us in mostly BIPOC communities, so how will you feel connected to them in many things, identity issues and other things? So a lot of what we have to do is to make sure that we are putting forward candidates who are intersectional, that look like us, and I don't mean demographically and geographically, but many other things that look like us, that actually represent the community interest, and that we can have accountability mechanisms for them. And also, we need to have intersectional coalitions. My coalition is really special because we call ourselves an intersectional coalition because we are still majority white, most of the farmers are still white, but they are in solidarity and support of racial equity and BIPOC farmers. And we have created a lot of mechanisms to make sure that we have extremely accountability from our BIPOC partners and members. And at the same time, the issues that we care about, our members get to vote on the issues that I spend my time lobbying in DC. And yes, a lot of them are traditional farming issues like agriculture, USDA programs, Department of Agriculture, land access. But other things are priorities that go beyond agriculture because we again need to be intersectional. And some of them are climate justice, labor and immigration rights, student loans, economic justice, reparations. So again, how do we build coalitions and collaborate, bring people into the fold through civic engagement to Washington, D.C. to hold their members accountable? It's not just by saying climate, but we're connecting them to issues really close to them, that they care about and are being impacted to them because of their identity or because of their work.
Well, it all comes down to moving policy, and I guess that seems to be the gridlock that we're facing right now. I mean, I don't want to talk about the Joe Manchin in the room, but Washington it's not a very unified place right now. I know you don't want to talk about policy and politics, but I'm going to zero in on you to have you weigh in on this. What do we do about this? Solve it.
I'll solve it right now. I need to be honest. This is a non-answer, but the real answer, it takes an all-of-the-above approach. The way this works is it takes a lot of people coming at the climate issue from a lot of different standpoints. It's the technology folks, it's the economists, it's the social activists, it's the people in government. And the important thing that is happening, this is my only line on this, that is happening in government right now that is exciting, is that the Biden administration came in and put out an executive order that says all agencies that do international work, think about the climate considerations of what you do, which No, does one thing, it empowers the folks who were already doing that, and they have attention time, what have you. But more importantly, what it means is that folks who are doing international work that didn't think climate was in their lane are really figuring this out.
Because they have to.
Because they have to, and they, in large part, they want to.
Yeah.
There's a lot of excitement. Put that in the parking lot, but it's beyond that. It's really a whole of society, it's a multidisciplinary approach. Congress will do what it does. There's a lot of folks on this panel in this room that can't move the needle there, but I sincerely believe if we just put all our eggs in that basket or another basket, the techno-optimist basket, whatever, I'm not confident any one solution set that will work. So we need to we need a lot more eggs, but as many baskets as
I
possible.
think they were talking about yesterday, like pulling different levers. You know, if the Washington lever isn't working, then go to the tech lever. If that's not working, let's go to the EV lever. But we have to pull something. We have to move the needle forward. We have to take some kind of action. I'm interested in getting the Canadian perspective on all this because you seem to be, your country seems to be a lot more progressive than we are here in this country. Are you facing the same kind of gridlock that we are here in this country?
That's a really good question. I think the unique differences between America and Canada is in Canada, we've kind of collectively just accepted the fact that climate change is real, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the Canadian government, but the Canadian government and its leaders have called on a climate emergency in our parliament. And every political party in the last election had to pull forward an actual climate plan. And previously, that might not have happened. You might have had one or two parties that put something forward. But now we have that at the national level, provincial level, and local level, where discussions about climate change, we're not debating the science about it anymore. It's more so how do we want to go about implementing effective policy, and how stringent do we want to be in our regulations and the standards that we want to push forward, not only for 2030, but for 2050. So I think those are the unique differences within Canada, but I think because we have that collective understanding of climate change, especially with youth, it creates a challenge that they're still a little bit apathetic to action, because we have that understanding. We have so many youth organizations out there, but it's that free rider problem where it's like, okay, great, someone else is going to deal with it. But that's not how we should be going about things. As Samuel mentioned, it has to be a holistic approach. Everyone has to be at the table. So, seeing a situation where politics acknowledge climate change, that's still not the answer. We still need to do more beyond that.
Yeah, unfortunately, climate change does not discriminate. It doesn't care if you're Republican or Democrat. The ocean's going to rise. It's going to do what it's going to do. And that's just the way it boils down. You wanted to chime in on this, Vanessa. I saw you pick up the microphone. What did you want to say?
Definitely. I just want to say, we were talking about there's a lot of power in Washington, and sometimes we focus so much in Congress. There's power in agency. There's powers in the executive branch. There's power at the courts right now. Right now, I have $5 billion stuff in litigation that needs to go to farmers of color doing environmentally sound practices, and is being challenged as constitutional. So there's power not just in Congress, so we have to deal with John Manchin and others, but there's other avenues of power that we can be engaging. And like the first thing that I did federally in federal policy was to submit a comment in rulemaking. And rulemaking is how an agency should implement a policy that has been approved already. So there are a lot of soft power ways that we can engage at a local level to still drive with the federal government a lot of the initiatives, and we have to take advantage of the leadership that we have right now. I'm telling you, since the new administration kicked in, my workload doubled, but in a good way, because it's good work that needs to happen. So right now we are like in asteroids in DC, taking advantage of this administration to move things forward, because it's a short window. We don't know how long we're going to have it.
Are you hopeful, Saga Tom?
Yes.
What makes you hopeful?
I mean, the folks in this room, honestly, we're doing this for us. Like, I was doing the math the other day. The two dates that we think about are 2 years of 2030, 1.5 degrees, 2050, net zero. 2050 often feels far off, but I'm 28 now, the older end, at least this cohort. I'll be twice as old as I am now in 2050. I'll be 56. I won't be retired. I'll still have to find a job. I'll be working. And I'll be working on this. We're all going to be in that boat. We have to figure it out. We don't have a choice. And I just see a lot of action. This is a multidisciplinary approach. There are people coming from all those kinds of disciplines that I named in this room. And I just constantly see young people, and honestly, people at every age and kind of from every background, really trying to work out how do we scale whatever clean energy innovation, how do we make the existing things cheaper, how do we get the resources to communities who need them, adaptation, mitigation, both on a global scale, local scale. I'm constantly, as somebody who's been doing this a little bit, I'm constantly learning about the digital things we need to do and who is actually already doing them. So it's inspiring.
Jacob, what about you? Are you hopeful?
I'd certainly say that I'm hopeful. I think that certainly being here and seeing everybody here, something that's really valuable, I think that's something that you spoke on just a little bit, is that it's necessary to have multiple baskets, right? And I look at people sitting next to me, and I think we all have different ideas and different solutions to the problems at hand. And some people may see that as a bit of an issue when it comes to focus, but I see that as a positive, because one thing that is going for us in terms of fighting the climate battle is that there are so many solutions. There are so many positive steps that we can take in order to make things better, in order to correct things about our society. So while it is an uphill battle, I think that this is an issue that if we really think things through and plan things out properly, it's one that can speak to people no matter what they are passionate about, right? Whether they're farmers, whether they're people who live coastal, whether they're people who live in the inner city, no matter where you are, no matter what your background is, I think we are very fortunate in that there's so many different ways people can get involved. I think it's really endless, and that alone gives us a strong base to work with if we understand how to utilize it properly.
There's a lot of philanthropic dollars being funneled into the climate action movement and to innovation. You were speaking earlier, Faith, about some of the innovations that have gotten your attention. Want to share some of those with us?
Yeah, so for me, the innovation I would like to see in the future a bit more parsed out is small modular reactors. Yeah, back when, I mean, yeah, it's everyone's focus area right now, or just curiosity. When I was working on energy policy, when we look to specifically our northern communities and remote communities in general, because Canada is just so sparse and we only have 35 million people. There are more people that live in California than live in the whole Canada. So for us, it's like, okay, if you're not connected to the electricity grid, what are we going to do for you? How are we going to ensure you're part of the transition to a low carbon future? So I do know there are a lot of challenges, of course, with SMRs in relation to nuclear energy, but I think there's a lot of things that could be explored. Definitely, we have to reduce the development costs associated with SMRs for them to be even competitive with renewable alternatives. I think we have to reduce it about 90 to 95%. And that's going to take a lot of iterative innovation. But the more that we take our opportunities with these wild cards, the more innovation we can spur, and hopefully that can support us in addition to mitigation and adaptation policy development. Because we need all players at the table. It can't just be policy, it can't just be private sector and industry or whatever have you. We need to explore technologies like this.
Bottom line is we have to modernize our grid, we have to decarbonize our grid worldwide. All right, so we've certainly had a lot of fun up here, but I'm sure you have some probing questions out there that you'd like to ask some of our panelists. I'd like to open the floor up to some of our audience members to see if they have any questions they'd like to ask. I think the beautiful lady in the green dress is raising her hand. We'll have a microphone coming to you shortly.
It's not the dress, it's a suit. Please, come on.
Hello, my name is Jalen Ward. I am the Director of Diasporic Engagement at Generation Green. We're a youth-led environmental liberation nonprofit in Washington, D.C. So, of course, I have questions about reparations. Okay. So we understand that imperialism and colonization are responsible for environmental degradation in formerly colonized nations. We understand that what we call natural capital is amassed through extractive practices and subordination through racial and ethnic means, or slavery, to put it plainly. But I also believe our imagination is very impactful. So what do we imagine climate reparations to look like, young people?
Jacob, you want to take that one?
Sure. First off, I want to say that I think reparations are incredibly important issue and something that needs to happen in society. My senior thesis during my undergraduate charges the United States with genocide against African Americans in this country. And in doing so, at the end, advocates for reparations as a key part of remedying all the pain and damage that has been done. I think that in terms of what that necessarily should look like, I think that there's a lot of different approaches somebody can take. I think at bare minimum, I do think it's really important to incorporate a financial aspect to this. When we look in terms of protecting a lot of the communities that are often bought up, gentrified, turned into parking lots or shopping malls, that ultimately really destroy our environment and make things worse, especially from a capitalist perspective, in impacting our environment. I think that financial impact is really important. The component is really important to protect those communities against these kinds of assaults that happen all the time.
I think that solving the climate crisis also presents opportunity to make things better, to make a better world, right? As we begin to redevelop and reconceptualize our cities, it should be equitable. There should be equity in addressing the climate crisis, and I think there are a lot of people fighting for that to happen right now. Any more questions from the audience? Well, before we leave, maybe, was there somebody out there? No, this is right. Would you like to answer that? Yeah.
I just wanted to answer your question about climate reparations. For example, as an agricultural organization, we have been asking for land reparations because land is wealth and land is foundational and infrastructure needed for climate action. And when we have a new generation of farmers who are climate smart farmers, who are environmentally sound farmers, the best tool that we can give those farmers as climate reparations is land.
And I believe you have a question right here from this young lady.
Hello everyone, it's so nice to hear you speak. Yesterday I was in a panel with Reverend Yearwood and the opening question to us was, what does justice mean to you? So I'm just really curious to know what it means from your particular perspectives and what does a just world, imagined world look like?
We could go around robin and answer that very briefly. You want to start with you, Sayatol?
It's a good question, and it's always top of mind, especially when it comes to climate. It's difficult. I honestly think, like, climate action needs to be very solution-oriented. How do we make our solutions actually create opportunities for the people who most need them? And there's a way where we do climate action that does not do that, and it actually happens very poorly. There's an intentionality that we can bring to it where we actually create jobs and create livelihoods, long-lived, really good livelihoods across the world for the people who need them the most, who have already been affected by the climate change that has happened. So I think kind of centering that approach broadly.
Yeah, it's a really good question. I just moderated the environmental justice versus climate justice session. And our biggest takeaway from that session is justice is accountability. Justice is wealth transfer. Justice is the integration of these communities into decision making to ensure that they're part of the policy development or program project development. And for me, justice is acknowledgement and ensuring that we're not thinking about generations of today. We're also considering a perspective I'd like to utilize is the 7th generation principle from Indigenous knowledge, is that we have to start thinking about 7 generations from now, not just us. So I think that would be what justice would look like, and that's what I would be hoping for the future.
What does justice look like for you, Vanessa?
For me, justice is not static. You have to be willing to adapt your definition of justice. I'm a huge dystopian reader, and when I look back at the original definition of utopian, there's always comes with a caveat. What it will take to create a perfect society or the perfect climate action, there's never a perfect answer because we are always basing our understanding and some notion of what justice means to us, we forget to ask what justice means to the rest of us. So it needs to be kind of static, it needs to be restorative, and it needs to have almost like what is usually called in philosophy a contextual agreement. If there's something in your proposal for justice that you don't agree with, you can veto it. So we need to think about justice as never static, but always evolving.
And making everybody a part of the conversation, right? We're all stakeholders in this. I mean, there's no one that's left out of this. It affects everybody in the entire world. Jacob, you want to add something to that?
Sure. I think something that I want to share, as we briefly had a mentioning of mentors and the importance of mentorship, something from one of my mentors, Dr. Cornell West, talking about racial injustice. He very much made clear the difference between fighting for equality and fighting for liberation. Equality simply is making things equal. If the status quo is already problematic, do I want to be equal to a problematic status quo, or do I want to be liberated and free to create a brighter future? And I think it's really important that we understand that distinction, because we need to fight for something greater than just an equal playing field for everybody. We need to liberate everybody in order to create something much greater than what exists today. And to do so, I think we need to correct the injustices of the past if we ever want to get to a just future. So whether that be addressing the importance and necessity of reparations, as was brought up before, I think that's a necessary part of it. We need to address the history of redlining in this country that still impacts so much of what is going on today. There's so many injustices that we need to account for, and we can't just move past if we actually want to liberate people.
Well, I want to thank our panel. I want to thank you guys. I knew this was going to be an inspiring and very informative discussion. I think Speaker Pelosi said on Monday night, it is the youth that gives her hope. You guys give me hope. Each and every one of you. It's been an honor to share the stage with you. Thank you for sharing this time with me and your thoughts with these beautiful people out here in the audience. Have a great day. Enjoy Miami and enjoy the rest of the conference. Thanks for coming.